Hello everyone, from the surreal 1950s to the dark late 21st century. I'm going to read you a couple of extracts from Take You With Me, which is my novel in progress. It's rather a strange world with its own language. I'll tell you a tiny bit about it before I start. The network is the supreme power. You have the network, and then you have the flesh work. That is us. And alongside the flesh work, you have some rather iffy robots called Bodais. All crime is ID crime. Oh, and there are electronically synthesized vampires of the mind, but we'll get that there in a minute. Avonmouth.City, 2087. The port's control node lay in the near above. Within its anonymous shell, a group of Bodais ignored the clear view over the docks to the estuary and moved between displays that told of ships' comings and goings. No flesh were present. If they were, the Bodais' attention to the consoles would have seemed farcical, for only flesh needed screens and controls to marshal the maritime trajectories and schedules. The Bodais wore glassy expressions, registering one another, seeming to converse, emulating those in whose subjugation they were conjoined. Practicing flesh-like interactions was part of the Bodais' training regime, a way to pass the time as long as their algorithms handled the moving blips satisfactorily. But on that day an anomaly occurred. A ship entered through the radar horizon that should not have been there, did not exist in big data. The ship was headed directly for the port, crossing dangerously close to other traffic. This was highly unusual and triggered an exception. The Bodais engaged in protocols to identify the ship, to contact those on board. All attempts failed. A threshold was reached. They called for flesh. The Deputy Harbour Master, Stevens, entered with an assistant. Stevens ignored the Bodais, the screens and the controls, and marched straight to the window overlooking the busy port. Bearing? His assistant read from the screen. Through powerful binoculars, Stevens examined the approaching ship. Shit, what the hell is that? He passed the binoculars to the elderly assistant, who whistled when he saw it. Like something out of another time. Cute little cranes on board. Is there any part of it that isn't rust? And it's doing 25 knots. What do we know about it? Nothing. It's not online, and it doesn't correlate in big data. You've already sent an intercept, right? Call them. The assistant touched the beads on his left wrist, which reconfigured. The sound of the boat's watery concussions through mild static filled the control room. Lenchik, talk to me. Can you give us a visual? Sorry, no, but we have a good view. I'd say 2,000 to 3,000 tons cargo. Never seen anything like its condition, all broken up rust. Maybe someone found it on the bottom, patched it up. Any response from its crew? None. Offline. No sign of anyone. In complete breach of ID. Is there anything to go on? Well, the name, you can just about read it through the rust, and Mechanic Pustoshny, if my Russian's any good. And where is it sailed from? Stevens was getting nervous. It was not far now. Not known in big data, the assistant confirmed. You mean we're going to have to look it up in a book? The assistant looked around at the Bodais, who were standing awkwardly behind them. Should we ask them? Stevens ordered them. Find the logs, the physical logs. From when, Lenchik? 60 to 100 years ago, I'd say, from Elizabethan times. What do you want me to do? It's not slowing. Please repeat, one of the Bodais said. The assistant rolled his eyes. It's headed for an empty section of the quay now, he said to Stevens, and with a bit of luck it's going to miss that supertanker it's a hair's breadth from. Shall we wait? Or do what? Blow it up? Yes, we'll wait. That was the prologue, and now from a little later on in the book, after the ship's arrival. And a vodou, which is another word that's going to appear now, which actually comes from an ancient term for a West African spirit, is a purely mental, vampiric force. She had been squatted, he could tell at once. That is, they could tell. the voodoo inside him too. First, there were her eyes, live with mental magic. Then the veins were another giveaway. They were like a man's, only more. They almost blued and snaked beneath the glistening skin of her arms in an apparent effort to escape from her inhabitants. She had been beautiful, though, with spiralling locks, velvet eyebrows, perfect teeth. He had the hots for her, he suddenly realised, for this young woman across the desk in the interview cabin. That was part of it, too. They say that if you discover someone who is your unknown sibling, brought up away from you and without your knowledge, you will feel an attraction despite the taboo. Well, David thought, that's how it works for us upon recognition. Only it doesn't last. How could it, given what happens? There was a boatload to get through, 16 of them found aboard the Mechanic Pistochny, a boat from another century, discovered in a state of exhaustion, except for her. David knew her to be incapable of tiring, however. She had presented herself to the boarding party. From West Africa somewhere was the best guess, somewhere as yet unknown, in Niger's dominion. What was she doing here in Avonmouth City? Recognition was quite possibly mutual. David was covered up in a suit, the Avonmouth ID cop. He wore his customary shades, but you never knew. She was smart with mental magic. Maybe she had other ways of sniffing him out. He looked at her beads, the bracelet of moving dots implanted at her left wrist. He felt towards her with his beads, straining on his own left wrist. Nothing. She stared through him, projected a thin, mocking smile. I can't do this, David thought. Not now. The voodoo inside him concurred as to his weakness. David stood outside in the heat, watching the loading and unloading around them. This wasn't a place, it was a node where wands and machines flowed. He watched the young woman being taken away, cuffed to a police one. There wasn't much he could do about her, even if it were a case of mental magic against mental magic. His, latent in the voodoo inside him, hers, driving her inexorably. Who would she take with her? Some soul, and he meant that, close to literally, give or take, a philosophical nicety. There was no longer much room for those in 2087. A module drew up. The chief climbed out. A chief. For this one was not flesh but a bodai, an artificial eye assigned to a bod, the bod to a module, the module dispatched to David, and consequently this node. Anyway, there it was. I need your report, ASAP. You'll have it today, David deliberately looked as though he didn't mean it, a casual and common expression of fleshly dissent to the network. The Bodai probably wouldn't recognise David's disrespect, and what did it matter if it did? Who have you talked to? Just network and her? He gestured at the departing detainee. The chief didn't look. Flesh. Yes, why? Like you. Indeed. There was a pause. One might have said there was a rumination on the chief's part, a pondering on the role of flesh in the network and what the chief could expect from David, especially in the way of intuition, which lay beyond them. Bodais relied on flesh to interpret flesh, but could they trust flesh? In fact, the pause was just a timing routine, a ruse to slow them down so they could talk to flesh and not freak flesh out with sheer speed. David sensed this one might be a little iffy on the network-to-fleshwork interface. Give me headlines, it said. He cringed at the phrase. She's given me nothing. From somewhere in Africa is all I know, I think anyway. She's the first of 16, long day ahead of me. What they're doing in a crate like that, fetching up in Avonmouth, I had no idea. Flesh should be taking modules, right? Not getting wet. It's not as though they don't have them out there. You've been. You could say that. Another timing routine. The uncanny blankness of a Bodai pause despite the engineer's best efforts. I spent my 20s there, David continued, speaking to himself. Send me your report. This one had a peculiar gait. If he'd been flesh, David would have said he grew up on the street. Off he went to be sliced, rebodied, reassigned, moved, whatever. The combinatorics weren't worth thinking about. That was what the network was for. But why this interest from the network? More specifically, something told him the curiosity came all the way up from I&I. Above him, wind turbines whumped against the hot, white sky. Thank you.